First, let us do some examples using plain Redux. That means we will not be using the Redux toolkit library. To do these examples, we'll need a React application that has been created using create React app command line tool. If you have one, you can use that, or you can create one using this command npx create React app followed by name of the application. I have given app 10 over here. You can give any name you want. Once that command completes, cd into that folder, and from within that folder, type npm space start. That should start the development server and also open this folder in VS Code. So I have done that, and under the src folder, I have created a subfolder called components, and under the components folder, I have created a subfolder called redux_examples, and I'll be putting the React components that we create in this folder. To be able to use Redux, we will need to add a few libraries that are related to Redux. So let's add them first. I'll stop my development server by pressing Ctrl C, and I'm going to type npm install redux react redux immer redux devtools extension redux thunk and redux saga. And let's also add Axios to this list. Let's go over this list. So the npm packages that we are adding are Redux, which is the core Redux package, React Redux, which helps us to use Redux with React, Immer, which helps us to write code more easily within reducers. Next is Redux DevTools extension. This is related to the browser extension that we will be using called Redux DevTools. Redux Thunk and Redux Saga are needed to help us with asynchronous things like making API calls. And finally, Axios, which you are already familiar with for making API calls. So I'm going to press enter, and once that command completes, start the development server by typing npm space start. And if we open package.json, under dependencies, we can find entries for Axios, Immer, React Redux, Redux DevTools extension, Redux Saga, and Redux Thunk. So we have added the libraries that we will need for our examples. Now let us proceed to create a Redux store. So how do we create a Redux store? If we go to the documentation at redux.js.org/API, we can find a method called createStore. And if you observe, the first parameter it takes is a reducer. So we have to create a reducer before we are able to create a store, because we need to pass that reducer to this createStore method. So let's first create a reducer. And we can use the combine reducers method to create an application level reducer. The documentation says that the combine reducers function turns an object whose values are different reducing functions into a single reducing function that you can pass to createStore. At this point, I just want you to note that the combine reducers function helps us to get a single reducing function that we can pass to createStore. So let's go to VS Code and create a Redux store now. I'm going to close this file, and I'm going to add a folder under src folder. So I'm going to select src folder, and I'm going to select this new folder icon over here, and I'm going to call the new folder reducers. And I'm going to select this new reducers folder, and I'm going to add a new file called index.js. And in this index.js, I'm going to import combine reducers. So I'm going to type import, and I'm going to start typing combine, and you can see that VS Code is prompting combine reducers over here. So I'm going to select that, and so VS Code has put in the rest of the import statement for me. So we have imported combine reducers from Redux library, and the way we'll use it is we can write const root reducer equals, we'll call combine reducers, and you can see that the documentation says that the parameter is reducers, and more specifically, it is an object whose values are different reducing functions. So for now, let us just pass in an empty object. So let's do that. So I'm going to pass in an empty object to combine reducers like this, and I will export root reducer now. So I'm going to type export default root reducer. As we do our examples, we will be putting the reducers for the examples in this object over here as key value pairs. So we'll come back to this file later on. For now, let us take this root reducer and use it to create a Redux store. So I'm going to select src folder, and I'm going to add a new file called store.js. As you can see, I have added a file called store.js directly under the src folder. And in store.js, let's import the create store method that we looked at earlier. So I'm going to type create, and I'm going to select the third entry over here. So I'm going to click on this now, and VS Code will add the rest of the import statement for me. I'm also going to import the root reducer that we just created. So I'm going to write import root reducer, and I'm going to select the first entry amongst the suggestions. So I'm going to click on this now, and VS Code has added the rest of the import statement for me. So we have imported create store from Redux, and we have imported root reducer from /reducers folder. That means the root reducer will be imported from the index.js file within the reducers folder. Let's import one more function called compose with DevTools. So I'm going to type import compose with, and VS Code is trying to help me out here. So I'm going to select that here, and we have an import statement for compose with DevTools. So we have imported compose with DevTools from the Redux DevTools extension library also. So now we are ready to create our store. So I'm going to type const store equals create store, and the first parameter I'm going to pass is the root reducer that we have imported, and the second parameter I'm going to pass is the compose with DevTools function call, and I'm going to export the store now. Export default store. Let's go over the create store statement once again. We are passing in two parameters to create store. The first parameter is the root reducer, and the second parameter is a function call to compose with DevTools. Do not forget to add the brackets over here. Now we have our Redux store ready, and we can pass this Redux store to our application. So under the src folder, let us open index.js. This is the file that will have the statement react dom.render, and that takes in app component as the first parameter. Here the app component is enclosed within react.strict mode component. But the main point to note here is that the app component is the root component of our application. So what we are going to do here is we are going to import our store now. So I'm going to type import store from, I'm going to type /store, and I'm also going to import the provider component because we'll need that to make the store available to the app component. So I'm going to type provider from, and the provider component is part of the React Redux library. So I'm going to type React Redux over here. So what we have done here is we have imported the store, the Redux store that we created in the store.js file, and we have also imported the provider component from React Redux library. And what we can do is we can specify the provider component over here and pass the store to the store prop like this, store equal to store, and we can close the tag. Let's put app component within the provider component so that the app component becomes a child component of the provider component. As you can see here, we have surrounded the app component with the provider component, and to the provider component we have passed in the Redux store that we created earlier to the store prop. And now the Redux store will be available to the app component and every component within the app component. That means the Redux store will be available to our entire single page application. Please note that what we have been doing is setting up a Redux store and making that Redux store available to our single page application. We haven't started doing our examples yet. This kind of setup is needed only once for an application. Let us go over the steps once again before proceeding to our examples. So what we have done is under the src folder, we have created a reducers folder, and under the reducers folder, we have added a file called index.js, and in index.js, we have imported combined reducers from the Redux library, and we have passed in an empty object over here, and that gives us the root reducer, and we have exported the root reducer from this file. Since we have a root reducer, we proceeded to create a Redux store. So under the main src folder, we created a file called store.js, and in that file, we imported the root reducer from the reducers/index.js file, and we also imported the create store function from the Redux library, and we also imported compose with DevTools from Redux DevTools extension, and we called create store with the root reducer and with a function called to compose with DevTools, and that gives us a Redux store, and we exported that store from this file. And then we went to the main index.js file within the src folder, and we imported the store that we created earlier, and we also imported the provider component from React Redux library, and then we wrapped the app component with the provider component, and we also passed the store that we created earlier to the store prop of the provider component. And because of this, the Redux store will become available to the app component, which means it will be available to our entire single page application. There's one final thing that we have to do to complete our setup, and that is we have to make sure that we have the Redux Developer Tools browser extension installed in the browser. Right click and open the browser developer tools. And if you do not have this Redux in your menu, that means you probably do not have the Redux developer tools browser extension installed. And if that is the case, please make sure to install this browser extension called Redux DevTools. And now we are set up to do our examples.